1942 Tunsberg. Two Viking ruin protectors listen as the Nazis take over their hamlet. Nazis enter through the front door. The explosion kills one caretaker, while the other begs the soldiers to go. They opened each crypt while disregarding the elderly man. Reaching the lid is too heavy. The collapsed entryway shows a mysterious figure. Nazi Hydra Chief Johann Schmidt arrives casually. Crossing the chamber, he opens the tomb. An older Viking holds the glass tesseract inside the skeleton. Schmidt begs to leave. Schmidt jokes that if true, this cube would be Odin's crown gem. After breaking the cube, he questions the groundskeeper about it. After being threatened by family, the keeper points to a concealed drawer with a large old carving fragment. Schmidt uncovers the bright cube. Schmidt shoots the caretaker after ordering city shelling. At a Brooklyn recruitment station, 20-something, 90-pound, 5-foot-tall asthmatic Steve Rogers anxiously anticipates U.S. Army enrollment. After 4 failed enlistments, the Army doctor rejects Steve's for F application. He has 90-year-old medical records. Steve visits the theater when unhappy. The pre-show newsreel made him envy the military. Steve urges the man to stop and is surprised when he turns, stands up, and towers above him. "Start the movie," he shouts. This was free. The bully beats thin Steve in the theater alleyway. Steve loses valiantly. Steve's best buddy, James Bucky Barnes, races to the alley as his opponent screams why he won't give up. The bloodied Steve replies, "I can do this all day." Steve is upset that Bucky arrived and eliminated the bully while he was calming down. He kicks and assists Steve. Bucky was in the 107th Infantry. Bucky invites Steve to dance with 2 girls on a joyous double date. Steve follows timidly. For attend the Queen's World's Fair. While Bucky dates, Steve sees Howard Stark fail to show a flying car. Steve enters another recruitment office alone. Bucky asks Steve how he will falsify his application this time when he wakes up. Dr. Abraham Erskine overhears them. He admires Steve's persistence. Steve's 6th recruitment physical is Bucky's wish. An MP and Dr. Erskine make Steve uneasy on an exam table. Dr. Erskine has Steve's applications. After his failed applications, Erskine wonders if Steve joined the military to kill Nazis. The young man hates bullies, regardless of their ethnicity. Erskine's Germanness doesn't bother him either. Erskine approved Steve's latest application due to his faith and determination. Johann Schmidt presents Dr. Arnim Zola, his Hydra weapon expert, with the glowing cube in a secret military facility in the Alps. Schmidt and Dr. Zola use the cube's seemingly limitless power to power energy rifles and cannons. Dr. Erskine and Colonel Chester Phillips closely observe Steve in basic training. The latest government super soldier initiative invites his brigade. Phillips dislikes Dr. Erskine's Steve devotion. Steve meets gorgeous but ambitious British officer Peggy Carter, Haley Atwell, in basic training. Peggy pities Steve. Steve, the platoon's smallest and weakest member, is the most enthusiastic, selfless, and resourceful. In particular, when his platoon is tasked with removing a flag from a tall pole, Steve casually pulls the pin holding it up and takes the flag when the pole crashes to the ground as the other, more physically fit company members fail one by one. Phillips scatters the group with a grenade while exercising calisthenics. Phillips is astonished when Steve jumps on the grenade alone and swears to die to help the others before finding it is fake. Phillips trusts Erskine. Steve and Dr. Erskine talk that night. Dr. Erskine admits to having done this experiment before over schnapps. Johann Schmidt was tasked with inventing a superhuman serum before emigrating to the US. Schmidt became a red skeleton after injecting himself with a Steve serum prototype. Steve receives dangerous therapy. Steve and Peggy explored Brooklyn the next morning before visiting a historic antique store. Steve mentions various Brooklyn assault sites. She questions his steadfastness. He claims fleeing encourages assault. They enter the antique store and enter a hidden military bunker after exchanging pass numbers with the old woman at the register. Peggy shows Steve the bunkers inside, where Dr. Erskine and Howard Stark finish a medical pill and Colonel Phillips mixes with senators and dignitaries. Steve must enter the spaceship naked. Erskine said Steve would hurt but be stronger. Carter bids Steve farewell before joining Phillips in the overhead viewing room. Stark says Rogers' surgery would begin with muscle regenerators in critical muscle regions, followed by Vita rays. Steve enters the Vita-Ray capsule after Erskine's muscle serum. Steve screams but urges them to continue as the capsule lights brilliantly and the procedure ends fast. After the capsule is turned off, Steve is a foot taller, 100 pounds heavier, and more muscular. Only his visible anatomy has increased. Even Phillips applauds Erskine. German spy Heinz Kruger leaves a tiny knapsack. Spectators burn. Dr. Erskine is killed by Kruger. Peggy murders the guards and chases him. Dr. Erskine dies after Steve points to his heart. Steve chases Kruger from the bunker. Peggy kills Kruger's getaway driver. Kruger robs a taxi to hit Peggy. Steve stopped the cab, saving her. Steve outruns the taxi. He jumps onto the taxi, dodges Kruger's gunfire, and crashes near the Brooklyn docks. Steve hides behind the star-printed taxi door as Kruger fires. Kruger runs to his Hydra sub, which submerges as Steve approaches. Steve swims after the submarine, breaks the cockpit glass, and pulls Kruger up. Before injecting cyanide into a false tooth and dying, Kruger tells Steve that Rogers can cut off one head, but two more will appear. Schmidt's obsession with magic and the occult causes the Nazi Party to call him the Red Skull, which angers him. Schmidt shows Hydra's operatives his weapons labs, 3 unstoppable energy weapons, and a strategic map of Europe. Phillips wants Steve as a lab rat, but Steve wants to fight in Europe. Phillips and Carter found Dr. Erskine's lab the next day. Erskine alone could produce the serum, depressing them. A senator shows Steve a newspaper from the day before with a front-page photo of Steve pursuing. Steve joins the USO, United Service Organizations, and tours the Midwest, selling war bonds and performing musical pieces. He becomes Captain America, has a theme song, dances with women, and briefly punches Hitler. Steve encounters Carter, who manages the war's European theater in Italy with Phillips and entertains the troops. She informs him that the guys are furious because numerous members of the 107th Infantry died in battle. Steve runs to Phillips after Bucky split. Steve thinks Stark and Carter are dating and suppresses his passion for her. Steve parachutes in his Hydra anti-aircraft guns fire on Howard Stark's plane. Steve infiltrates Hydra and kills multiple guards. Steve frees hundreds of 107th guys and instructs them to depart Messy. With the help of the Howling Commandos, the inmates overpower their guards, steal weapons and tanks, and escape, destroying the complex. Schmidt and Zola produce enough weapons to destroy every capital. Steve discovers Bucky in pain on an operation table and a large tactical map with marked installations. Steve gives Bucky the map and amazes him by being taller. The Red Skull tells Arnim Zola to meet him at another Hydra base and steal his car while glaring at Rogers and Bucky from the elevator. Schmidt faces the Red Skull on a retractable bridge. Schmidt uses his face as a mask and plays with it. Phillips dismisses Agent Carter's defense, claiming losing Rogers' Project Rebirth's single achievement would be irreparable. Phillips writes to his 107th base camp typist about Rogers missing the night before and possibly dying in combat. In London, Steve gives Phillips and Carter his best recall of the Hydra base map and says he wants to destroy each base and join a squad of men he liberated in Italy. Rogers is absent as Captain America's battlefield victory is global, but Congress does not award him. The next day, Phillips and Stark summon Steve to the Brooklyn bunker. A pretty female cop thanks Steve. Steve kissing the enlisted woman sends Peggy running. Steve follows her to Stark's lab, stating that he's nervous around women and questioning why he should apologize if Carter and Stark are dating. Stark quickly rejects the relationship and takes Steve to his weapons engineering lab. Steve says Rogers' triangular shield is useful field gear. Steve finds a plain, round shield on a lower shelf adjacent to numerous complicated prototype shields. Stark says the barrier is vibranium, which is lighter than steel, vibration resistant, and absorbs heavy impacts. He asks Peggy's opinion with the shield. Steve dodges her. 45 pistol clip at the shield. Shield passes a makeshift test. Stark leaves with a uniform sketch from Steve. Steve affects Red Skull and Zola. Steve wears red, white, and blue fatigues, a blue form-fitting helmet, and the newly colored shield on his back. Captain America, Bucky, and his army smash Hydra's European bases. Steve masters using the shield as a projectile weapon and discovers it can ricochet. 3 teammates, Cap, Bucky, and Gabe Jones, zipline across a massive gulf and storm the train car by car. Hydra guards Cap and Bucky. Bucky falls from the train into a frigid river as they narrowly defeat the soldiers. Zola taken. Colonel Phillips visits Zola. Zola refuses his steak dinner, thinking it's poisoned. Phillips eats. He informs Zola that Hydra received his basic defection message. Zola is the lone Hydra, therefore, he can bargain. Carter finds Rogers weeping at a war-torn tavern. Steve realizes Dr. Erskine's serum rapidly regenerates dead cells, making intoxication difficult. They flirt again about dancing. Rogers, wearing new clothing, rides a Harley and attacks the base, easily dodging Hydra soldiers and tanks. He's arrested and taken to Red Skull's private weapons lab to explain his specialness. Steve says, "Nothing, I'm just a kid from Brooklyn," as his teammates zipline. Phillips and Carter led hundreds of soldiers into the base, killing many Hydra soldiers in a final firefight. Red Skull races to his hangar to launch a gigantic Tesseract-powered flying wing. Steve chases the plane unsuccessfully. Phillips and Carter follow the plane in the Skull's roadster. Before boarding, Peggy kisses Steve. Steve leaps from the roadster onto the plane's massive wheel. He sneaks aboard and sees dozens of kamikaze jets and rockets flying over key American cities. Steve fights multiple Hydra soldiers and mini-planes. A New York plane freefalls. Steve throws the pilot through its rear propeller and crashes it into the flying wing. Captain America and the Red Skull fight in the cockpit. Steve's shield prevents Red Skull's cube energy cannon rounds. Shot hits the cockpit's blue cube. After console damage, the Skull raises the cube. A celestial portal opens above him. Red Skull's glow. Steve awakens in a 1940s hospital. Vintage radios transmitted Brooklyn Dodgers games. The hospital door opens as he rises. Peggy like Amanda Righetti enters. While she waits, Steve watches. Why is the radio playing his May 1941 game? Her pocket reveals a two-way radio. Steve smashes two black uniformed troops. The hospital is a movie set as Steve enters the hole. He sprints through dark halls, pushes a door, and enters a modern building full of business clothing. He fled to Times Square in 2011. Many dark SUVs surround him. Steve gasps, "Fury, I had a date," recognizing that everyone he knew in the 1940s is dead or old. Nick Fury, Samuel L. Jackson, softly tells Steve he's been frozen for 70 years. Hospitalization was designed to ease him into modern life. Fury asks Steve whether he's had trouble sleeping at the gym post-credits. Steve cynically doubts Fury's mission. Fury agrees. Steve punches a punching bag until it falls from its chain and flies across the room. Fury declares they're up and completes his superhuman army, foreshadowing the Avengers. Steve/Captain America, Thor, Tony Stark, Iron Man, Hawkeye, Black Widow, Bruce Banner, the Incredible Hulk, and other S.H.I.E.L.D. agents prepare for war.